As Gord mentioned, my name's Paul Elder, and I'm a former CTV news reporter and a former mayor of a Canadian city. And the only reason I'm telling you that is because people have a tendency to believe that reporters and politicians aren't the kind of people that would ever stretch the truth. So I just wanted to get that out right away, you know. And a car accident at 17 and a heart attack in the middle of a hockey game when I was playing when I was 41. And each of those occurrences resulted in a really profound experience that essentially changed my life. You cannot have an experience like that that doesn't change your life. Here's some statistics for you. The most recent surveys reveal that there are more than 20 million people in North America that have had a near-death experience. So a huge number, right? Over 20 million have had a near-death experience, all right? What's even more remarkable is that science and medicine, parapsychologists believe that up to 20 to 25% of all people will have a peak moment, a near-death experience, an out-of-body experience, a peak spiritual moment at some time in their life. And that's a huge number as well, right? Now, many of you are here because of that search. That's something inside that makes you seek, right? Now, in order to give you an understanding of where I come from, I'll just give you a bit of my background, all right? I was raised on the prairies, raised in a fairly strictly Catholic family. Big family. There was 11 kids in her family. I was the 10th out of 11. My mother had 8 girls in a row, and she figured out what she was doing, and she had 3 boys. So, I mentioned we were Catholic, right? The rhythm method apparently doesn't work so well. And it's funny what people, you know, even back in, this is back in the 50s, and so, I mean, large families were pretty common back then. But even then, people said strange things, you know, like people would often say, and my little brother and I would string them on. They'd say things like, 11 kids, good grief, how come so many kids, like we knew? You know. And so we'd say, well, that's because our mom was deaf. Every night when they went to bed, my dad would say, well, Mom, you want to go to sleep or what? And she'd say, what? So, that'll lead to no good at all. I grew up, I think, pretty much like most of the kids back in the 50s and 60s. One significant event changed my life, and I didn't realize at the time how significant that was. You want to find out? You want me to tell you what it's like to drown?
Yeah, please.
It's a wonderful experience. You may not think so. On a Saturday, I was probably around 12 years old. On this particular Saturday, we had our 2 cousins from the big city of Edmonton were visiting. And we got out into the pastures and running around like kids do out in the country. And my little brother and I couldn't swim a lick. And so our parents, my mom especially, had always warned us to stay away from the ponds and dugouts that were around in that part of the country. And so wouldn't you know it, on this particular day, we found, at the end of this big pond, we found a raft that the neighbor's kids had abandoned or left there. And so, of course, within a few minutes, we're bobbing around in the middle of this pond. And when my older cousin found out that we couldn't swim, in fact, we're sort of terrified of water, he thought it'd be great fun to rock this raft. You know. And I was born under the sign of Murphy's Law. So, in no time, I'm in the water. I fell in, and you know, I didn't even, I knew I couldn't swim. I didn't have the presence of mind to even dog paddle. I went into the water my head went below the surface, and I was sailing towards the bottom. And you know, it's an amazing thing. I always thought that drowning would be a horrible way to die. And we've all had that experience in swimming pools or lakes or whatever, of not being able to get your breath, of being under the water or whatever and suffocating and just struggling. Your lungs are bursting trying to catch your breath. Well, it wasn't like that at all. As soon as the air goes out and the water comes in, it's absolute peaceful. Absolutely. So, strangely enough, before I even got to the bottom, before I settled to the bottom in the mud, the air went out and the water came in, and I was really quite amazed. I just felt very peaceful. And you know, it makes sense, right? We spent the first 9 months of our lives in a liquid environment. So there is no struggle. When your lung capacity is filled with water, there's absolutely no struggle. And it's just very peaceful. And the only thing that happens, obviously, is there is lack of oxygen going to the brain in your bloodstream. So soon I just felt like I needed to sleep. I just got very tired. And I floated up once more to the surface of this pond, and I just momentarily saw the light at the top of the pond, or the lighter water. And I sank back down again into the pond, just drifting in my thoughts, and being actually so amazed that I was calm and cool, and just wanted to sleep. So I felt my feet sink into the mud at the bottom of this dugout. And slowly, I just went to sleep. Just slowly, everything faded out into the blackness. And I just sort of hung suspended in the water, I guess, with my feet in the mud. And the next thing I knew was one of these awakenings. I snapped awake, but everything was different. I was still aware that I was in the water, but there was this huge bubble around me, like a bubble of energy. And inside the bubble was every color in the rainbow. It was so remarkable. And the greatest thing about it is I noticed that the colors all vibrated. Each color had a distinct vibration that I could feel going through my body. Red had a different feeling than orange, and orange different than blue and violet. And it was so remarkable. And I remember just sort of floating there in this bubble and running my hands through these colors and thinking, my God, I didn't know you could feel colors. I'm 12 years old, so I didn't have a lot of perspective on things. And the colors vibrated right through the center of my being, right through my body. Such a remarkable experience. So I'm floating there, and it began to dawn on me that this is pretty serious. Something's wrong. I'm probably dying. And with that thought, I began to think about death. And the only reference that I had to death or dying was just a few weeks before that. I had read the book Tom Sawyer. And remember in the book in Tom Sawyer when Tom is believed to have drowned in the Mississippi somewhere, and he shows up back home for his own funeral. And I thought about that. And there was an instant movement, and like a shot, I went flying out of the water into the air, and a second later, I'm floating over the choir loft in the back of our Catholic church out in the country. And boy, was I amazed, because I was flying, just floating over the pews in the upper deck of the choir loft in the 2-story building. And I actually did this underneath me. to see what was holding me up. It was just so amazing. And I floated back and forth, and I found or discovered that just with my mind that I could move around in this space, and I could float over here or float over there. A couple of times I actually floated over the edge and looked down the 16 feet. But that was a little scary. Isn't that weird? And I thought, well, if this is my funeral, then where are my mom and dad, and where are all the people that go to church? Of course, it was Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock. And so I floated there, just mesmerized by what was happening to me, by the vibrations, the feelings inside. I had never felt better in my entire life. I was flying, and I thought, Tom Sawyer didn't fly. It was such an amazing thing. And I'm floating there, contemplating all of this, and I felt this huge spasm in the center of my stomach. And just like that, in an instant later, I'm on the shore of the dugout, and my cousin has me around the waist, and he's bouncing me up, and my face is bouncing in the mud, and the water's coming out. That was a shock. And so after a couple of minutes of vomiting and things like that, other than a little burning in my lungs, I felt just fine. And you should have seen the eyes of my brother and my two cousins, because I'd been under the water apparently 6 or 7 minutes. And so they were just, everybody really in shock. And so I felt just fine though. I had the most remarkable experience. And so we sat there for a few minutes, and then we made a pact, because we knew if our parents ever found out about it, we'd get, And so we made this agreement that we'd never tell another soul. And then we walked really slow on the way home, so our clothes would dry. It was about 1.5 miles. And we weren't home for more than 10 minutes, and I was out in the yard, and I heard the cussing in German coming out of the house, and the kayaying, and wow. 2 kids got a good whipping on that day, and I was one of them. That'll teach me to die. Now, even though I had ended up in a church, and this was a highly spiritual kind of thing, being in a soul body, it never registered as anything religious or of any spiritual significance for me. And so I went on with my life. When you're 12 years old and something like that happens, but you're fine afterwards, it's sort of like, whoa, that was weird. And you go on with life. Make another slingshot, get in trouble. I never ever paid attention to the significance of that. And I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I told my cousin about it, and I'm sure he thought I had water on my brain. It was my cousin who pulled me out. And he was only 12 years old as well, so it took a long time for him to find me, and they were all in really a state of shock. And you know, it's an interesting thing. I don't think I ever thanked God for saving my life. I did thank Brian, though, my cousin Brian. So I hope he doesn't hold grudges. It wasn't until much, much later on in my life that I discovered or found out how significant that particular event was, how it changed me, how it opened a pathway. Anybody in here had a near-death experience or out-of-body experience? Or, oh my God, see, I'm talking to the converted here. Wonderful. So you know what I'm speaking about. Much, much later in life, I went on into business and into politics, and spent about 10 years as a reporter for various television stations and radio stations, and got into politics. And a significant event occurred. This is back in the province of Saskatchewan. The premier of the province, by then I was a city councillor. I had been elected to city council. And the premier of the province came out and asked me if I would serve or if I would agree to run in the legislature for the provincial legislature. And I thought I was some kind of hoity-toity. Isn't that cool? I'm so important. And so I agreed to it because I thought that was pretty cool. And it's kind of like the moment that I agreed to it, I was already second-guessing or doubting or wondering whether that's really the thing that I wanted to do. It would change my life significantly. I'd have to move to Regina. No offense to anybody from Regina. I actually had lived in Regina. And I wondered about how it would affect me and how it would affect my life with my family and my kids. And I really worried about whether that was the right thing to do. And as the time approached, on this particular Friday evening, I think the nomination meeting was on Monday. On Friday evening, after a long kind of week, I went to bed really late, about 1:30 in the morning. And I was thinking about this, or worried about whether I should do this. And I woke up at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I thought I'd fallen out of bed. I could feel some prickly things in my back, and I thought, oh my God, I can't believe I fell out of bed. I opened my eyes, and I was shocked. Because I wasn't on the floor. I was floating at the ceiling of my bedroom. And the pokiness in my back were the little stipple pieces. I was bouncing lightly against the stipple like a balloon. We'll talk about a revelation. The first I'd ever heard about out-of-body experiences was about 11 years before that. In about 1980, I watched a television interview with a guy named Robert Monroe. And he'd written a book called Journeys Out of the Body. And it became something of an international classic on the subject. And I thought, that's really interesting. And so I borrowed the book from the library and I read it from cover to cover. And I thought, really cool, but this guy's a brick short of a load. Didn't put a lot of faith in it. So I took it back to the library, forgot all about it. So here, 11 years later, I'm floating at the ceiling of my bedroom. And guess what? First thing I thought about was, holy smoke, that Monroe guy wasn't crazy. Most remarkable. I knew inside that I'd been somewhere and I was just returning. I had no idea where. And it was such a familiar feeling. It was like, I've done this before. And I looked down and I could see my wife in bed. And I could see this other guy laying with her in bed. And I was thinking, what the? And then I realized it was me, my body. That's a shock. It was such an amazing thing. So I'm floating there wondering, well, what do I do now? How do I get back into my body? And so I thought about that, and I thought about directing myself down, and I floated slowly down towards my body. And I missed. I don't know how you do that. But I ended up floating about horizontally, about 2 feet off the floor and about 2 feet away from my bed, looking at my profile on the bed. Now that is awesome. We never ever have the experience of seeing ourselves from the perspective of other people, other than in photographs or in little movies or in the mirror. But actually seeing yourself firsthand, that's weird. And I was just examining myself. Of course, I'm laying there and it looked like I was sleeping, my mouth hanging open. I'm thinking, oh God, you look old. What's going on? And I thought about it, and after a few moments of sort of examining myself and this whole concept, which was incredible, And I thought, well, I got to get into my body, I think. You know, I never ever had the thought that I was dying. I felt better than I've ever felt, really. It was wonderful. And so by thinking about it, and I thought, well, I got to reconnect, I got to get back inside my body, and I just slowly floated over that 2-foot space, and I reconnected inside my body. I could feel myself move into it, energy body. And when I got inside, there was this snapping, jerking sensation, just boom. And I opened up my eyes, and I looked around the room, and the clock, my clock radio on the nightstand said something like 3:02 a.m. And there were these incredible vibrations moving through me in waves from my head to my feet. And there was a noise attached to it. It was just like an electronic swirling noise going through me. Every molecule in my body felt like it was on fire or tingling with electricity, with excitement. It was so remarkable. And I'm lying there, and I looked up, and I could see the ceiling of my bedroom, the stipple on it. And I could see right through, and I could see the stars in the sky. And the vibrations were just so powerful, and I thought, oh, I can do this again. And somewhere, I summoned up the courage to try and do this again, because I was beginning to remember Bob Monroe's book. And with that thought, I began to float up to the ceiling, and there was a sound of whooshing or squishing air, and it felt like little hands lifting me up. And after I separated from my body about 2 feet off the bed, the sound died down to absolute silence, and I just floated quietly up to the ceiling of my bedroom. And I'm thinking, it's pretty dark in here. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I thought, I wish I could see better. And instantly, it was like a light. It was all around me, and I could see the entire bedroom perfectly. And I thought, okay, now what'll I do? Maybe I'll go through the rest of the house like Monroe did. And so I turned in midair, and I floated towards the doorway of the house. And as I got closer to the doorway, you know the part over top, the header beam over top of the door? I was going too fast, and as I got close to that, I realized at the last minute I was going to hit it. And so I closed my eyes and turned my head, and I was so amazed when I sailed right through it. The upper part of my body, my shoulders and my head, went right through the upper jamb or on the header on the door. And I could feel everything. I could feel the gyprock or the drywall. I could feel the 2x4s in there. It was so amazing. And I came out the other side, and I'm stunned, and I looked back at the wall as I slowly sank to the carpet. I thought, oh my God, I just went through a solid wall. It was too freaky. And I slowly sank into the carpet in the hallway. And I could feel the carpet, the fibers of the carpet come up through my feet. And I looked down, and I could see the carpet, and I could see my feet. And then I could feel the underlay, the padding. And then I could feel the plywood, and I thought, oh my God, I'm sinking. I could feel it all. And it was such a powerful feeling. Thank goodness I stopped sinking. So I'm standing now in the hallway outside my bedroom, and I could look through the door on the bedroom, and there about 30 feet away is my body. And I looked at it and I thought, how can this be? My brain, the instrument that I use for thinking, is over there, and I'm over here, perfectly well and thinking. How can this be? And there came a voice out of the blue. I didn't know whether it was inside of me or outside of me. And this voice said, you are not your body, you're not your brain, you're conscious living energy. And I actually spun around to see who on earth it was. And there was nobody there. But the voice sounded so familiar. It wasn't like my inner voice, but I'd heard it before. And it took me a moment or two to sort of get over that. And I thought, wow. If anything will convince you that you're not just a physical body, something like that will do it. When you have your entire consciousness about you away from your physical body, your life changes. All of your concepts change. Right? So I thought, what should I do now? I'm going to go floating through the rest of the house. And I'm standing at the top of the stairway. And I floated down and just lifted up again, that wonderful, wonderful feeling. I floated down the stairway about 2 feet off the floor. And when I got to the landing at the bottom, my toes touched the carpet. And instantly, like that, I'm back in my body. And all the vibrations are gone. And I looked over at my clock and it said 3:04. And I was amazed because I thought, only 2 minutes went by. That felt like it could have been a half hour. It was so remarkable. But when I got back into my body, it was that, remember I was telling you before about that instant snap, that jolt. And I thought, that's what that is. Every one of us does that. Every night when we fall asleep. How often have you watched your kids or your wife or your husband or even your animals sleeping? You drift off to sleep and you got these little jolts, right? That jolting sensation. That is your energy body returning back into your physical body. As you fall asleep, as you lose consciousness, your energy body shifts and starts to move away from you. It might spend the night floating 6 inches away from you. Most often, though, you spend that time reconnecting on the other side with your soul group members and other loved ones. Right? A lot of times, and there's a whole bunch of study on this, a lot of dreams that we have are the brain's representation, the brain's construction or translation of an out-of-body experience. How many of you had experiences of flying dreams when you're kids, or even now? Yeah, see, there you go. Oftentimes, or mostly, it may not make sense in your dream after you wake up. It makes perfect sense. Have you noticed that? When you're dreaming, it makes perfect sense. When you wake up, you go, oh my God, what on earth was I? That's the brain's interpretation of an out-of-body experience. We do that every single night when we go to sleep. For the most part, we just don't remember. We don't have a conscious recall of that. Some people do. Right? So, remember I was telling you about those 20 million people in the near-death experiences. By and large, they found in the various studies that people that have had the experience of a near-death experience also become more psychic. Right? They have the perception of being more psychic. I don't think they're any more psychic than anybody else. It's just that they have learned to pay attention to it. When you find yourself in that place, and you can remember and recreate that passageway to the other side, right? It's easier to pay attention to the things that go through your mind. And so one of the things that you can ask, or one of the things that I'll ask, what do you see when you close your eyes? At night when you're going to sleep, when you're drifting off. Anybody see faces? Yeah, a lot of people. Usually faces of spirits, and you all will see them. It's just that you haven't focused on it, you haven't concentrated on it. But they're there, and a lot of times the faces of spirits will come in, and they could be your loved ones. A lot of times could be spirits that you don't know anything about. You become aware of them, and they take place in your mind, perhaps in black and white. just for a moment or two, and then they fade out and another one comes in. Have you noticed that? That movement of faces and little dream images? All right. Now, a lot of those people, those 20 million people that had the near-death experience, they experience other things, becoming more psychic. A lot of them will have out-of-body experiences. Here's an interesting thing as well about survivors of near-death experiences. All right? Relationships take a real beating. For some strange reason, even though the people that have a near-death experience might describe or say it's one of the most remarkable spiritual events of my life, and it is, and they become a better person because of that. More loving, more caring, etc. Relationships have difficulty with that. Spouses have difficulty with that. You know, so even if you become a better person, it's sort of like, well, where's the old jerk that we used to, that we used to know? And so a lot of those relationships, the majority of them actually fail. Here's another thing. So when we were talking about that jerking sensation, when I moved back into my body, and I recognized that immediately, that feeling, that snapping sensation is your energy body moving back in to your body, you know. So the next time you find yourself waking up in bed with a jerk, let me rephrase that. So you'll know what that's all about. And put that into your mind about the fact of what just happened. That was your energy body reconnecting. That was you reconnecting with your physical body. Okay? Many of those people that had near-death experiences go on to have out-of-body experiences, as I mentioned, become more psychic. And even though, remember when I talked about the experience when I was 12 years old as a drowning experience, that I didn't attach any significance to it, to that event, I had no idea how that had changed my life, how I had become more visibly psychic. So in my family, for instance, if my sisters or somebody lost something, they would ask me. I just seemed to know where it was because I could see things in my mind. I didn't know that that was not particularly normal. And so I had this ability to see things. But that's about the only thing that I ever registered, that this is just something that I can do. After that experience, the out-of-body experience, floating near the ceiling of my bedroom and going through the house, I wanted to recreate that. I wanted to do that again so badly. And so I went to the library and I borrowed Robert Monroe's books again from the Monroe Institute. Thank goodness he had written another one by then called Far Journeys. And I discovered that they have a place that he set up, a research center in Virginia known as the Monroe Institute. And it had become a world leader, world pioneer in consciousness research. And they actually had classes there that I could go and attend for a week to learn more about it. And so I began that process, and I visited the Monroe Institute, and it was the most wonderful place. It's sort of in the Blue Hills of Virginia, just outside of Charlottesville. A wonderful, remarkable place. And I began a journey of out-of-body experiences that spanned the next 15 years. So since then I've had hundreds of out-of-body experiences, and I've discovered or learned a lot of things. For example, that we all have spirit guides, or angels if you will. And not just one, but probably two or three. And sometimes, and they change. They'll change off during our lives. One might get us to a certain place in our what's the word for it? Yeah. In our journey, and the things that we want to discover and learn, what I found out was that we designed this to some degree. We choose our parents. We choose our life and the kind of things that we want to experience. Mostly, we come back here, time after time, to experience the emotions, to experience the tough stuff. And I wouldn't have believed this. After these episodes, out-of-body experiences, my mother died on her 81st birthday. And she had Parkinson's disease for the last 20 years of her life. And then she got cancer. And we thought that she could be sainted. She was a wonderful woman. She feared, because being Catholic, she feared that she wasn't good enough to go to heaven. And so I think she feared death. But for the last 2 months of her life, she basically slipped into a coma. And on her 81st birthday, we got together in the hospital room, and the entire family. And my sisters brought a birthday cake. And we sang happy birthday to her. And she woke up. Remarkable. I mean, she wasn't able to speak or anything. But whereas for 2 months, when you looked into her eyes, there was nothing there. Now she was able to move her eyes, and she recognized us. And she smiled. And then a couple of hours later, she left. Finally. And I had a different perspective on it. Because by then I'd had out-of-body experiences. I knew where she was going. I knew that how wonderful that was. And I didn't grieve. So this is a celebration. And I thought, I can reconnect with her at another time. And so I tried for probably almost a year, go into an out-of-body state and try, and I just could not connect with her, could not find her. And then one night, the vibration started, and I floated up out of my body into my bedroom, completely forgot all about my mother. And I heard a voice call my name. And I looked in the direction of this, and I'm floating at the ceiling of my bedroom. I looked in the direction of this voice. And by all that's holy, I swear that's true. The wall in my bedroom, including the dresser that was in front of the wall, began to swirl. About a 6-foot vortex or circle began to swirl and slowly move and evaporate, or to become sort of clear. And I could see through this vortex in my wall in my bedroom. And I saw sort of an oval of energy, really bright white light, approaching. And I heard my name again. And I knew without question that this was my mother. Now it's an interesting thing, and I'll talk about that later as well. If we live many, many lifetimes, what's your name on the other side? What's your appearance? You know? We all have an identity, a vibration that is unique to all souls. And that vibration stays with us for many, many lifetimes. Doesn't make any difference. We have an identity on the other side of who we really are. So, my mother, or this large sphere of light, floated through the wall of my bedroom. And when she came inside the bedroom, took the shape of my mother, but not the shriveled up 81-year-old dying of cancer that I saw last. But she was probably in the prime of her life at 35 or 40 years old. And she looked wonderful. And I went to hug her, and it was such a tremendous feeling a reunion. And I wanted to tell her how sorry I was for the life that she had. Excuse me. For the life that she lived. She didn't have any luxuries. We didn't have running water. We didn't have telephone. We didn't have a television or any of those things. And she raised 11 kids, and she had a husband who wasn't particularly helpful or caring, an alcoholic who was around every now and then. And I wanted to tell her how sorry I was that she had to live that kind of a crappy life. And she said, no. It was great. That's what we wanted. That's the way we wanted it. And I thought, woman, what have they done to you over here? He wanted that? And she said, yes, your brothers and sisters, all of us, this is what we wanted. And I'm sort of, what? I don't believe this. And she says, of course. She says, that's how it works on this side. She said, before I was born, I knew how I was going to die. And I said, Mom, that's spooky. And then I got thinking, I'm standing here talking to the spirit of my dead mother. That was spooky. Such a remarkable thing. But she said that we wanted that. And I couldn't imagine it. But I cannot believe that. Especially in my relationship to my father. He wasn't a nice guy. And she said, your father was a good teacher. Excuse me. And I thought, of course he was. He taught me how not to do some things, how I would never treat my kids. I never had a relationship with my father. Never once put me on his lap or hugged me or told me that he loved me. So this is the kind of relationships, that. And it's not uncommon from many, many years ago. The old guard from the old country. I mean, man is a man, and and that sort of thing. But I thought, this was such a remarkable revelation to me. Why would I want this? And so when I had the first opportunity, and by then I had met my spirit guides, a spirit guide named Meldor, strange name, but I suppose it was Bob or Harry, I might not have believed it. And I want to tell you about the experience with the spirit guides, as real or more real than me here talking to you. Right? You've heard this on television and radio and the Discovery Channel, people talking about near-death experiences. And to qualify it, they say, what do they say? It was more real than real. Right? You've heard that before?
Can I ask you about the color on the other side? The colors, are they different?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
More real than real. And I always thought, well, what does that mean, more real than real? Well, this might be something that you can put your mind around, right? Imagine that you were born with terrible eyesight, right? Couldn't see worth a hoot. And then one day on your 18th birthday, somebody handed you a pair of glasses, said, try these. You put them on, and you went, oh my God. Look at that. Look at all the colors. Look at the detail. That's what it's like. That's more real than real. These eyes don't see perfectly. This eye does. The spirit sees perfectly. Vibration and colors are so much more vital, so much more powerful. So it is more real than real. But I'm going in circles here. I asked my spirit guide about this, what my mother had told me, and he said, of course, that's how it works. We design our lives, we kind of plan them out before, not the day-to-day details. We choose our parents. We choose the kind of life that we want to live, the kind of experiences we want to live. And we don't come here for the easy stuff, generally speaking, right? And what's astonishing. We also have agreements with our spirit guides, or angels, if you will, who will come along with us in our minds, helping to direct us, helping to guide us so that we will experience the things we want to experience. We have this concept that our angels are here to protect us from harm, right? Guardian angels. Well, don't we got a sorry lot of angels if that's the case? You know? We've all had our hearts broken. We've all hurt. We've had physical accidents. We've had sickness, diseases, injuries. They're not there for that. They're there for your heart and for your desire to experience what you want to experience in this lifetime. Like my mother said, you know, she said, before I was born, I knew how I was going to die. And she planned it out that way. And we all do that. We will go through and we'll plan out the kinds of life that we want to experience. We will also plan out the way we're going to leave. And there might be 4 or 5 exit points that we plan out. And depending on where you are spiritually or in your travel, you may pick one of those. So for me, it could have been the drowning when I was 12 years old, or the car accident at 17, or the heart attack at 14, or endless other things. So obviously I haven't learned enough yet. And we pick that time and that opportunity, and our spirit guides help to make that happen. And when I was talking to my spirit guide, and he was explaining this to me, I had a great deal of difficulty with it. And he said, no, that's how it is. That's how this process works that we're here to experience. And he said an interesting thing. He said, there is a virtual lineup of souls on the other side who are waiting to incarnate into the bodies of handicapped babies, or people that will become handicapped at some point in life through accident or illness or disease. I found that astonishing. I thought, why would anybody want to do that? And he said, consider the opportunity. Consider the opportunity for growth and experience. But he said another thing that was very interesting. More often than not, for whatever reasons that a soul would choose to endure a handicap of some sort, they're doing it as a sacrifice. Because we make agreements with each other. We travel in groups of souls together. In this lifetime we might be, might be the father or the mother. In the next lifetime, the daughter or the son, and so on. The souls who decide or who choose to be incarnated into handicapped bodies are doing that as a sacrifice for who? For their loved ones who want to experience that. Now I know that's hard to fathom, because I couldn't imagine being able to do that. So we have to consider the kind of angels that we have among us, willing to sacrifice in that way. Now for the caretakers, for the loved ones, there's a special bond or place, right? I had a huge difficulty with this concept. And I have a friend back in Saskatchewan, in the city that I was a mayor in. Peter is an amazing guy. He is the most positive person I've ever met. You see him on the street, he's a plumber. You see him on the street, and 100%, how you doing? Great day to be alive, blah, blah, blah. Peter has 2 severely handicapped boys. They were born normally, but something happened, and by the time they were 2 years old, they were quadriplegic. He and his wife have been changing their diapers for 40 years. They're now 40 years old. His attitude is so wonderful. He takes the boys everywhere. He takes them to hockey games, to to baseball games, and you see them holding up their drinks so they can have a sip or taking them to the washroom. He considers it a blessing. Excuse me. I tell this 100 times, and I still get emotional. He considers it an honor and a blessing to have that kind of a relationship, that kind of trust. And what a wonderful attitude he has. His sad moments, or his saddest moments, are when he considers the fact that he's in his early 70s and what's going to happen to the boys when he can't take care of them anymore. So, it sort of gives a different perspective on it. Very difficult thing to comprehend sometimes. But these are the kinds of lessons that we want to learn or we want to experience. And we come for the tough stuff. And our spirit guides will help that to happen. And guidance is just very gentle, as most of you know. It could be just a thought put into your mind that you might think is your own. Right? How many times we've heard this before? People would say, you know, for 20 years I've gone to work the same way. Last Friday, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I went around the other way. And when I got to the office, I found out that there was a tanker exploded at that corner and I could have been killed. Right? That happens lots. It's not a coincidence. Some guidance had him do that. The same guidance that might cause you, with a thought in your mind, to decide, well, I'm going to go over to check out this bookstore. And in that bookstore you meet somebody that will impact your life or change how you feel about your life. So that's where the guidance comes from. Some real examples, powerful examples, for instance. 9/11 was a very good example of that, and we've all heard probably many of the stories. On that particular day, and that particular time, those flights coming out of Logan Airport in Boston usually are jammed to the rafters. On that particular day, they were relatively empty. On that particular day, the Trade Center was relatively empty. There can be 25,000 people in those two towers. And we all heard the stories about people saying, well, I would have been there, but I had to pick up the dog from the vet, or the kids got sick, or there was just many, many, many stories, right? That's guidance. And we also heard the stories from wives or mothers who were sitting at home thinking, my God, why would he pick today to go down to the Trade Center? And now he's gone, right? Those airplanes that were relatively empty. Because of that fact, some people got on in standby. Because that was part of the plan. That was part of the experience that they wanted to experience. Right? Let me see how my time is. Oh my.
Well, you got another 20 minutes.
Oh, that's not near enough. I'm just rearranging my thoughts. What's that?
You or you guys.
Yes, I find that sometimes. So it explains so many things. The fact that we come here, and the fact that reincarnation. You all believe in reincarnation?
Oh, yeah.
Right? I didn't. I was raised Catholic. It wasn't part of our belief. Until I had a powerful, spontaneous past life experience in which I was an Asian soldier, Japanese soldier, killed in the Second World War. And I wouldn't have believed it before that. Reincarnation is what it's all about. We come here time after time, we travel with that family of souls, and we go through different things. If in this life perhaps I was a womanizer or an abusive person, an abuser. I might very well choose to come back in the next lifetime as a woman who puts herself in a position of being abused, so that I learn the other end of that. Right? And I want to tell you some important things. There is no hell. There is no devil. Hell, if there was, I'd have found him. There is no punishment by God. God is only a loving being. And I'll tell you something else. You can't have this kind of experience, these kind of, whether it's out-of-body experience or a near-death experience, you can't have an enlightening experience like that without re-examining your concepts of God and who and what God is. I always thought I knew what God was. I knew who Jesus Christ was. That was this guy who sort of looked like the picture on my mom's wall in the kitchen. And I knew who God was because I saw the picture in the Bible that had this stern-faced, gray-bearded old guy who was going to fry my butt. No such thing. There's no God like that. Here's the simile from what I found on the other side with the spirit guides and all of the other souls over there. We are part of God. We are individuated aspects of the Creator. We are powerful spiritual beings. Use the simile, if you will, about the ocean. We are all part of God, all part of that consciousness that is God. And if you imagine the ocean, we are individual drops in the ocean. But each one of us carries the blueprint and the entire DNA for the entire ocean. We just don't realize it. When we come here, that memory is drawn away from us, sort of a veil pulled, because we could not experience the things we wanted to experience if we knew. The experiences wouldn't be real unless we felt that we were separate and that we weren't a part of this whole design. And that's such an important distinction. It's necessary for that veil to be pulled, for that separation or that feeling of separation to exist, in order for us to really feel what we came here for. On the other, this may sound hokey, on the other side is a spirit. Other than feelings of love, we can't experience those wonderful emotions that are here on earth. We can't experience hatred and fear or lust or any of those powerful human emotions. That's why we come here. To experience on behalf of the Creator. We are the Creator's attempt at continuing creation. And none of us will be happy completely until all of us have reached the point of God realization, where we've gone through this cycle. Sort of an amazing thing I noticed on the other side in the many, many out-of-body experiences. In seeing other souls and other spirits. Some of them were so large, so luminous, had such huge auras. And I asked about that. And my spirit guide said, well, they're souls who've been through many lifetimes, many challenging lifetimes. And that aura, that is experience. And it's not like a caste system where, oh, I'm way up here at this level and you're only down here. None of us will be happy, truly happy, until all of us are at that elevated level or have the huge auras. And there are the masters, of course, the ascended masters, the Christ consciousness, Buddha, Krishna. And there are a lot, and I'm inclined to believe it, there are a lot who believe that that is the same energy. It just came at different times. And I want to tell you about the fact that there is no punishment. God does not punish. Here's a scenario. You got a kid who's born in the ghetto somewhere in the world, all right? He's born to drug addict, alcoholic parents. Their life is on the street. They don't know anything else. They can't anymore. And so what happens to the child? The child grows up doing the best he can, looking after himself in the best way that he can, and he learns how to steal, and he learns how to cheat, and he learns how to do all sorts of things to survive. And then one day when he's 15, he's shot dead in the street. Now, we to believe that after that, some God is going to come along and say, well, yeah, but you cheated and you stole and you did all these bad things, so off to hell with you. I don't think so. No God that I know would do that. You wouldn't do that. I think the devil, and of course I'm stepping on dogma now, the devil is just an invention to make us feel better about ourselves. The devil made me do it. There is no such thing as a devil. There is no such thing as hell other than the hells that we create. The ones that we ourselves create. And I'm going to tell you a bit about a life review, and because time is running out here. When you die, we will all go through this. You will review your life. Right? Somehow, every thought that you think, every action that you take, everything that you do in this life is somehow stored energetically on the other side, whether you want to call it the Akashic Records or whatever else. There for your reflection, for your use, when you pass on. Okay? And nothing escapes. And I'm going to tell you about my life review, or just bits of it. It is literally, and you've probably heard this before, it's like having a photograph album flowing through your mind, or watching a videotape in your mind of all of the events in your life. And at any point you can stop that process and you can examine an incident. Right? And I'm going to tell you about this incident because it's the first one that I stopped the process. Stop this fanning videotape in my mind. I was probably about 11 years old, and it was in a schoolyard. And there was this kid in the schoolyard in our small country school. And he was one of those little yippy little guys, just a pain in the... And for whatever reasons. Anyway, on this particular day, he thought it might be funny to stand 2 feet away from me and go catch with a basketball. And it hit me right in the nose. And when you're 12 years old and your tears in your eyes, somebody's going to pay for that. I knocked this kid down because I'd had it with him. I knocked him down and I jumped on top of him and I was going to wail on him. And I couldn't. And now here I am experiencing that again. Every emotion, every detail of that. I was involved in that again. I was knocking this kid down and I wanted to beat the tar out of him. And then something changed. And I began to feel everything this kid felt. Excuse me. I felt everything he felt. I felt the humiliation, the pain, because he had a bloody nose now, and his tears, and his regret, wishing that he hadn't done that. I felt everything. I became that kid. Excuse me. And it dawned on me, I realized, I don't need Jesus Christ. I don't need God to judge me. This kid is judging me. I'm judging me. We can't escape our own minds. And this particular event, I have pretty much forgotten about it. You know, through the years. It was such a startling thing. And I knew immediately that God doesn't judge. Jesus Christ doesn't judge. If we want, when we die, if we're particularly Catholic or Buddhist, those deities will be there with us if we want them. They do not judge. They only love. All right? So I found out that we will experience all of these things. But I don't want you to be, I don't want you to fear that, because it's wonderful. All of those things are wonderful. Because there are other things, that happen. Other events that you will experience. That you may not have paid particular attention to. And I'm going to tell you about another one, another experience, so that you get the idea. We had in this city, when I was the mayor, there was a guy there who was known in the community to be something of an abuser, and the word to his story was that he beat up his wife and his kids, and on a regular basis he was a nasty kind of guy. One morning, and I didn't remember this at all until it's replayed in my mind in this life review. One morning this guy, I just walked out of City Hall and sort of ran into this guy, and this isn't his name, but I'll call him Mr. Dirksen. And I just chatted him up. It meant nothing to me. Just like, good morning, Mr. Dirksen. How are the wife? How are the kids? And we chatted for a moment or two, and he headed off down the street. I didn't realize that I had forgotten it completely. I didn't realize it was so innocuous it meant nothing in my life. I didn't realize the effect that has, or could have. So perhaps on this day, Mr. Dirksen felt better about himself because he talked to the mayor. And so he didn't go home and slap his wife around. And on this day, Mrs. Dirksen felt better about herself, so she didn't take it out on the kids. And on this day, the kids felt better about themselves and didn't take it out on their classmates and playmates. And I began to see how some small innocuous act could affect so many people. Excuse me. I get to speak in a lot of places, and I tell this story probably 100 times now, and I still get emotional. So, sorry for that. I want to tell you also quickly about, because we're running out of time, perceptions. If we plan out our lifetime, right? Many lifetimes. Oh, the definitive statement on reincarnation. Oh, it's you again. But if we plan out our lifetimes, we're going to inevitably run into many, many souls that we've spent time with through hundreds, thousands of lifetimes. And you will meet people and you will understand that. And you've all done that. You meet somebody for the very first time, right? You look into their eyes and it's like, wow, I know this person. Just seems like such a familiar thing, right? You've all experienced that, right? We've also experienced the other side of it where, we meet somebody and in 30 seconds we want to slap them. The eyes really are the windows to the soul, right? I want to talk just quickly about suicide, because I'm prompted to do that. I'll tell you about an event that happened just quickly. In Nanaimo, back in January, I had a speaking engagement at the Nanaimo Metaphysical Network. And couple of hours before the event, I went for dinner at a restaurant. And while I was sitting waiting for my meal, I felt vibration change inside my body, inside my head. And I heard this fluttering noise. You know that if you're driving down the highway at 60 miles an hour and you turn down your back windows, it gets that whoosh, 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 whoosh. That was happening in my head. And I thought, geez, now I'm having a stroke. This is great. This fluttering noise. And I began to hear a voice, a guy's voice. Just sort of like staticky, like on a radio that's out of whack. And I began to hear this voice, and I began to see images in my mind of a child being abused. And I thought, oh, good grief, what is this? And this guy voice is trying to get through, and I just hear sort of static. And finally, I hear him almost like screaming, and he's saying, you gotta talk about the suicide. And I'm saying, what? I'm not John Edwards, get out of my mind. We see it just seemed like such an intrusive thing. It never happened to me before. And I could see images of a suicide and death and child abuse sort of mixing together. And it dawned on me, oh, this guy wants me to talk about that because somebody at the meeting tonight, somebody at the lecture needs to hear this about suicide. And so, oh, grief. So I went to the lecture, did the lecture. It was one of the most confusing things. You think this one was bad? About every 10 minutes, I could hear this voice in my head. Staticky or whatever, wanting me to talk about the suicide. And I kept putting it off because he kept confusing me. And so finally, in the question period, somebody asked, they said, can you see spirits? And I said, well, not, unless I'm in an altered state, not usually. And this guy yelled in my ear just about jumped off the stage. He said, now! And so I told him about the incident. I said, I don't know what this is all about. I don't normally see them, but I sure hear them right now. And I told him about this. And I said, I don't know who this is for, but somebody here needs to hear this. And it's a story about forgiveness. Excuse me. And about understanding the roles that we play in each other's lives. And I didn't know whether this guy had been abused as a child and then committed suicide, or if he had abused a child and committed suicide. And so I talked about it, and he is talking to me about being sorry and making sure that I get this out because somebody out there. And there was a number of people that were crying in the audience. And afterwards, one woman in particular came up, and she said, that was for me. And, excuse me, I still get emotional. She told me that her partner, that she found out that he'd been abusing her daughter, and he committed suicide. She walked into the room just as he shot himself in the head. So for 3 years, she'd been dealing with that kind of pain. Pretty hard to get past that, right? That kind of stuff. And it made such a huge difference to her. Excuse me. To understand his role, her role in this, her daughter's role in this, essentially the reality is that there are no victims in life. We, to some degree, agree to the lessons that we want to have in our life. It may not be apparent to us in our physical bodies, but it is apparent to us in our spiritual bodies. The lessons that we want to learn, the things we want to experience. And about the role of forgiveness and being able to move on, patch up your life. And so I just wanted to tell you that. And a lot of us are affected by it, by suicide. There was, in this small town, village in which I was raised, I was an altar boy until I was 14 or 15 years old. We had this old German Catholic priest. And there was a family in town, and their oldest son was a little bit slow. And one day he committed suicide. He hung himself. It was like Friday or something. Sunday, we're in church having this Catholic Mass. My little brother and I are up there in our altar boy get-up. And this old German priest decided that this would be a good day to talk about suicide with the family sitting in the church. And he talked about how people commit suicide go straight to hell. That there's no redemption because they didn't have a chance to go to confession, which is everything. I could not believe it. On top of that, I mean, like, their lives are devastated, right? The unthinkable has happened. And here's some guy rubbing salt in that wound. Unbelievable. And then to make matters worse, and please, I'm still sort of Catholic, so I don't mean to. Times have changed since then, thank God. To make matters worse, in those days, if you committed suicide, you were not allowed to be buried in the church cemetery, because that was holy ground and you were a demon. Right? Unbelievable. That was the last time I ever went to church. My parents, I mean, basically I was almost forced to be an altar boy, and I just simply refused. They could have shot me and I would not have gone to church again. That is not true. There is no stigma to that. Now, knowing what we know about things, all right, and people will ask about it. If we have a say in our lives and the kind of things that we want to live and the experiences we want to have, then we played a part in it, right? And people will do the math sometimes or consider the consequences of that and say, well, what are you saying? You're saying that I could be, when I die, I could be a bunkmate with Hitler? If there's no punishment. Well, essentially, Hitler is a part of all of us. There is no punishment. But Hitler will go through a life review, or went through a life review. And he himself will experience all of those things. And so I asked my spirit guide about that. But what about that? I don't want to believe that. And he said, knowing what you know now, that we control the kind of lives we're going to live, or we plan it out. We're talking about a soul who agreed to go down in history as the most heinous person who ever lived on this earth. The most atrocious character that ever lived on this earth. He said, what kind of a soul do you think it would take to do that? Perhaps an advanced soul. I still have trouble with that, but it makes sense. That could not have happened without the consent of a whole lot of other souls. Right? That couldn't have happened without the rest of the world and all of the events that went into it. And now we're going into these other events, and we're moving into a new time and a new age and a quickening that's going to happen by 2012, and it's really about a change of consciousness. It's not about necessarily about earth changes and massive sweeping changes. It's about changing to in consciousness and moving back to the feminine principle and the matriarchal society instead of the patriarchal society, moving back to that inner place of inspiration and nurturing kind of souls. We have for thousands of years gone too far in the other direction. This is where we're heading. Now I want to tell you very quickly, and then I'll get out of here. There was supposed to be a question period too. When you die, and you do your life review, when your body is dead and in the ground, it won't matter one little bit to you who won or who lost, or how rich or famous you were. The only thing that will ever matter to you is how you treated other people along the way. So love each other.